Hello, Julie Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. Today we're making cookie necklaces. These make great gifts for your little girl or as favors for a birthday party for little girls. You can also turn it into a kind of a party game if you just make all the pieces in advance and allow the kids to assemble them. So different ways to approach this project. It's kind of unique insofar as it really emphasizes the use of embossed cookie dough with texture, as opposed to iced cookie dough, and also the use of royal icing transfers to embellish those pieces. And I'll talk a little bit about each along the way. So what we're gonna end up with is something that looks like this very lavish Victorian pendant necklace in front of us. It's hanging off this mirror, and I've got another version of it here in process of being assembled on this piece of cardboard, which we'll come back to a little bit later. You can make these with any number of pieces, but this particular project, I believe, has 6 pieces. One large sort of dangling pendant piece, a center medallion, 2 smaller cookie medallions, and then 2 smaller even still pieces that will ultimately get strung together. These are all made out of gingerbread. My gingerbread recipe is on my website. It's a great dough because it doesn't spread much during baking, so it's particularly great for embossed cookies. All of these cookies were baked in silicone baking molds. So for instance, I patted the dough in, stuck the mold, which is oven proof, into the oven and literally baked it in it. That's the best way to ensure no spread. You can pop it out and bake it that way, but it might spread a little bit. So all of them were baked that way. You can see my big medallion came from here and my 2 smaller medallions from here. This is a long hanging piece, and I have another mold from which these 2 were baked. This is the natural color of my gingerbread dough. So these other pieces that you see around it were treated in various ways to make them look gold. These large medallions were sprayed with my PME luster spray. There are different brands of this. Chefmaster has a nice version of it as well. And I've shown in other videos how I work with that. But basically you just hold it at about 4 to 5 inches from the cookie and spray it on rather gradually. And it creates this nice kind of glowing effect. The first step of this project is treating all of your pieces, your baked gingerbread pieces, so they look kind of gold. So you'd want to do that with both the big medallion and the 2 small medallions. And then for this particular piece here and for these smaller pieces, I actually got the gold on them in a different way. I wanted to see some of the dark gingerbread underneath. And if you were to spray using the luster spray, I'm going to put my glasses on, it would fill all the lower areas. And you wouldn't kind of get that sense of texture and relief, or not quite the same sense of texture and relief. Here I wanted a little bit more sense of that. So I find that sponging on a gold luster dust, I'm extending it here with a little bit of clear extract to turn it into a paint, really highlights the high points on these embossed cookies without getting into the deep parts, and just makes for a really nice effect. So here's an example of me doing it. I'm going to go ahead and sponge these 2 pieces that are going to go into this necklace, and then we'll get to decorating them. This doesn't take very long to dry, so we can work with them almost immediately. And if you want to, you can sponge the sides too a little bit, because the necklace will be somewhat viewable from the side. There you have it. And these 3 were sprayed, so you can see the effect of the different finishes. This is more uniform if it's sprayed, and this has got a little bit more depth and variation of color if you just sponge on top. And we're going to go ahead and start decorating these. And again, it's simply a method of sticking on royal icing transfers, which are royal icing that have been piped in various shapes onto pieces of acetate and then lifted so that they become separate pieces, like those you see on this plate. And this, I have the ability, you could pipe directly on these pieces, but by using the transfer process, I have the ability to configure these any which way I want and rearrange them a little bit. I have a little more freedom in terms of how I use them, which is what's kind of nice. So we're going to be working with transfers today, and I have a whole video which is going to show how to make these turquoise-like transfers, which involve 2 colors of icing and a little bit of gold luster, basic rounds, and also some of these textured pieces. So stay tuned for that. So we're ready to start applying the transfers. I'm going to work first. I'm just going to show you how to do some representative pieces. Again, you can decorate them any number of ways. I'm going to do a center medallion, and I'm going to do something kind of similar to this one that I've already done, except I'm going to use purple beads instead of the green beads for transfers. So again, this piece was sprayed and it's been allowed to dry, and I'm using a caramel colored, kind of a gold colored icing, which is a mixture of brown and yellow, because it matches the color of the cookie pretty well, and if any peeks out, it's less likely to show. I'm going to stick down one of my turquoise transfers, In the process of sticking it down, I knocked a little gold off the top, and I want a little more sheen, so I'm going to just pop a little, sponge a little more on. Now to size these transfers, I actually looked at these pieces in advance and I knew what size they were, and so I determined what size bead I might need in the middle to adequately fill it out. I created a guides for that in the Royal Icing transfer video so that they would come out the right size. So there was no guesswork involved there. It was all pretty precise. Same with these small pieces here. I measured them out, determined what size bead I would need here to roughly fill it, leaving a little room alongside of it, and that determined the size of the transfer. Okay, I'm just going to stick down a bunch of purple ones. It's just a gluing process. Sticking down a little bit of icing, sticking my transfer on top. Whoops. Trussing needle's useful for sticking things into place. So this is the beauty of transfers. When I first did these pieces, I had my dots centered on here and I didn't like how it looked. I wanted them closer together, so I was able to push them all slightly towards the center of the medallion to create, just the look I wanted. That wouldn't be possible if I'd piped the icing on directly. It wouldn't be much harder to lift, and this color, which is very dark, would have stained it. There are times when transfers are great. Okay, so I've got all my pieces on. Now you'll notice on this piece I have little dots around each of the big beads, and those are done by piping on royal icing. You'll also notice that the transfers are a lot shinier than the ones here, and that's because I've glazed them with corn syrup. The first step would actually be glazing and then laying the dots, because these tiny dots are so small, chances are I would end up glazing them in the process. After glazing, you'll want to let the corn syrup dry a little bit before adding the dots, otherwise the dots can bleed into the corn syrup. So we'll probably glaze these. I probably won't finish it out real time with dots today, or maybe I'll just finish out the center with dots to give you an idea of how that would work, because there won't be enough time for the corn syrup to dry. It doesn't take long, but it might take half an hour. So to glaze these, again, you want these just to be, hopefully I'm giving it a really light touch, just so I don't knock off the pieces that I just put down because the icing isn't yet dry. Small paintbrush, whoops, see, I picked that one up. That one might be hard for me to get down, again, because it's now sticky on top, so I'm going to put a fresh one down there. I want to give it a little light touch, and if you dry them a little bit longer, they're less likely to lift like that. I didn't allow any drying time whatsoever. And this is just straight corn syrup. It will dry shiny like this. It might stay a little tacky depending on the ambient conditions in your space and how humid it is. So it's always best not to really touch them because you'll leave a fingerprint on them once you've painted them. I'm taking a little extra icing there. But I love the shiny look it creates. It makes them look like little jewels, which is what they're supposed to be. Okay, and as I said, I would wait before I put any little dots around the purple pieces until the corn syrup was dry. Maybe give it at least a half an hour. But because I didn't paint the turquoise centerpiece, I'm going to go ahead and put some dots around there. The process is exactly the same. Use a loose royal icing of beadwork consistency, and my consistency adjustments will be in the link either here in the video or in my video description. And it should be loose enough that it forms a nice dot on its own. And I'm just going to pipe some pretty big ones around this center turquoise piece because it doesn't quite fill the cookie round in the center, and I want to fill that out a little bit. These will look like little pearls, maybe. I'm going to set that aside to dry. I'm going to show you how I did these little bracket pieces next. Again, I started by sponging it as you saw earlier. I've got some transfers that I made using a star tip that give them that texture. And I've gilded them in the same way by sponging them with the luster dust. I'm just going to glue a little piece at the end. This is supposed to look like a little clasp or bracket or connector piece between the jewelry that will be strung eventually. This is nothing more than the same gluing process we did before. Okay, the transfers are down. This is a really simple piece. Again, this is the beauty of not working with icing. This assembly process can go pretty fast. And embossed cookies are decorative in their own right, so you don't need to add a lot of stuff to them. I'm going to go ahead and also shine up these green beads with the corn syrup. And I think I can safely add the white dots here because they're not so close to the green beads. So we'll go ahead and do that. My white here doesn't look quite as white as the white there. And that may be because I mixed it a day ago. Sometimes it gets kind of looser and more translucent looking. And I don't have any white food coloring in it. So if you want it a little bit whiter, put a little bit of white food coloring in it. I'm just doing a few little dots on the edge. And all these pieces, all the icing that you get on it, you'd want completely dry before you begin the assembly process, because otherwise they'll just smudge off. So you could make pieces up to this point and allow your kids to decorate them later. Or let them do the whole process. It's kind of fun. So I would push this to the side. I'm pushing it to the side with my trussing needle so that my fingertip doesn't wreck those dots. Now lastly, let's talk about how to decorate this center medallion. I'm going to do something a little simpler than this piece that I have here. Put down a turquoise teardrop, maybe a turquoise round, and a couple of green dots, and then we'll go about the assembly process. Again, nothing more than a gluing technique. For this particular transfer, the kind of teardrop, I traced out the teardrop on acetate, just followed the form that I wanted. And again, I sized these so that they would fit in this area here on this particular piece without covering too much of that lattice work, which I really wanted to show. Probably would have been smart to start with this piece first so I can fit my green pieces around it. I may have to scooch that down. But you can see I have some mobility. Until the icing dries, I have some flexibility. I can slide things because these are transfers. Slide that teardrop down a touch to fit that a little bit better. Taking my corn syrup again, and I'm going to gloss these guys up. Got a lot on that brush there. I'm going to knock a little bit off. Trying to get around the sides of it too, so it doesn't just look like it's glossed on top. I'm going to put a few white dots down for accents. You'll notice on that other piece that I brought out and the one that I have in the foreground, I have white dots all the way around the edge. You can do that in advance and let it dry before assembly completely. Or if you want to play it safe, because those little dots on the edges are more likely to pop off, you can assemble first and then put the dots on after it's assembled. And I think I'm going to put the dots on at the edge after it's assembled in this particular case for that very reason. But the other dots on top can go on right away. Okay, so we're back. These pieces are somewhat dry. This one's still a little wet on top, so I'm going to be handling it gingerly, and I've got some I've done earlier that are completely dry. I'm going to start the assembly process on this one because there are some drying steps between adding pieces. We'll finish it off on the one that I started earlier. Now to assemble it, I've strung it together with ribbon. This is a wired ribbon, so again, it would have to be removed before eating, but it's really flat, and I like a low profile, very flat ribbon because then it's less likely to be seen from the side if you were to pick up this necklace and wear it, for instance. So I'm basically going to use a sandwiching technique where I use a very thick royal icing and glue a piece of fondant to the back side to hold that ribbon in place, let it dry, and then you'll be able to pick it up and hang it like that. You could sandwich with cookies, as I do in some of my other videos, but that would create a really fat looking piece, and I didn't really want to do that. So I've taken a caramel colored fondant, I've rolled it out, I've let it partially dry, maybe half an hour, exposed to air, so it's still somewhat pliable but not completely sticky. And that's just advantageous because it's less likely to stick to the bubble wrap that I'm working on. I like to work on bubble wrap because in some cases I may turn pieces over and it's less likely, you're less likely to disrupt decorations that way. So I've got my thick caramel glue again, and I'm going to take, this is about a 5-inch piece, which is longer than I need here. I'm going to start by stringing the little pendant. And then I just, oops, I got icing on top. Now, if this were dry, I could put it down on the bubble wrap and press on it, but since it's not, I'm doing this elevated. The other way to do this is to kind of just put it down on the bubble wrap and just kind of, right now what I'm doing is I'm gently pressing the fondant onto the back side of the cookie to make sure it's completely stuck down. Now I'll sit that down. And the next pieces I want to string together, I've got a fondant backing piece that just fits my round. I want to string this to that, but at the same time I want to introduce my element of ribbon on which the other side pieces are going to string up. I need to glue that at the same time. This piece is 30 inches long, which is super long. And I've marked the midpoint, which I'm going to put right about here. So I want to get my icing on here as glue, first and foremost. And I probably need to position it about here so it doesn't show behind. I need it a little bit higher so it doesn't show behind this piece. And I want to stick this ribbon down in it. Maybe put a little glue on top. And then rest that piece on top. Oops, before I do that, let me cut that extra ribbon at the top that I know I'm not going to need. I'm going to cut it a little bit taller than I know I'll need, because as I assemble, sometimes this piece can slide down, and if I have a little bit to grab onto, I can pull this back up and pull it taut. If I pull it too short, I won't be able to do that. And then once it's fully dry, I can clip off that extra. Does that make sense? So pressing that into place. So I'll leave that for now because I have the ability to pull up on it, as you can see, and get those really close together if it should shift as I assemble the rest. Okay, now I'm going to put on those bracket pieces. I have some that I made earlier that are really completely dry, which is why I can pick them up without the dots falling off. And I've got some pieces, these are rounds that are going to show, so I'm going to need to trim these down a little bit because they're a little bit too wide. I used round and oval cutters for these, but I ended up trimming them a little bit in all cases so they would fit behind these custom cookie shapes. So same kind of gluing process. At this point I keep it pretty much completely flat, inserting the fondant piece underneath, because if I were to lift it up, all these other pieces I just put together would move until it's dry. And again, it doesn't need to be so close. You want to give a little bit of room. I don't want it so close to that piece because when I put this down, you'll see the fondant in front of, peeking out from behind the cookie. So I'm sliding it out to the point that I don't see it and it's relatively centered on this piece. And I'm also going to angle this up a little bit so that when it's dry, it's in more of a hanging position. So you'll see I bent that ribbon up a little bit. Okay, so I think I've got it positioned where I want it. More glue down, set this piece on top. Gently press. And also gently from the back, I'm kind of pressing the fondant into the back side of the cookie. Hard to see, but that's what I'm doing. And you do the same thing on the other side. Again, I'd want to move this ribbon up so it's in more of a hanging position and make sure it's lying flat and not twisted. And you could stop here with just 4 pieces on this necklace and it would look really, really pretty. But I'm going to add 2 more pieces. I'm working on cardboard as well because when this is dry, I want to be able to move the whole thing up, move it out of my work area and start working on another piece. And this provides support underneath it until it's completely dry. This cardboard could stand to be a little bit longer because I am going to add another piece here. Got a little small round for that. Sandwiching it the way I did before. And then I just want to give everything a good look before I set it to dry and make sure everything's positioned the way I want it to be because that's the way it's going to dry, more or less. Now I'd come back and add another one here, but I'm going to do that on one that I started to assemble earlier, which is more dry, and then hopefully I can pick the whole thing up. So this is one I've put together already earlier. You can see how it's hanging nicely because it's dried. I typically dry overnight. So I'm just going to attach this other piece to it and we'll have one more completed necklace. So I got this one a little too far away, I think, because there's too much ribbon showing. I don't want ribbon showing. I want enough ribbon showing so that they can actually move relative to each other when they're dry. I don't want it too rigid, but I don't want them that far apart. So generally I put them just close enough that I see maybe like a 1/16 of an inch between the pieces, maybe even less. Okay, so that's glued together. Once it's completely dry, you can pick it up and hang it like so. As a display, you could put them on plates for people to greet them, you know, as a party favor. You could actually wear them if you weren't going to eat them. In my next video, I'm going to take this whole process up a notch, the use of embossed cookies and royal icing transfers to create 3D cookie tiaras. So till then, live sweetly.